welcome to Australian basketball history. Why don't we start with who you are, how old you are, where you're based. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Robbo Bennetts. I'm 72, about to turn 73, and I live about an hour's drive up in the hills away from here.
Fantastic. Thanks for coming in to have a chat with us. Why don't we go back to where it all started? What are your earliest basketball memories? Where did it kick off?
Well, my very earliest memory is having two PT or physical training lessons at a local grammar school here on an Ontakar or gravel court, and I was about 13 and I cannot remember touching the ball.
Okay, so your first experience with basketball wasn't particularly memorable. You had lots of other stuff going on. We're here in Melbourne, so I imagine footy and cricket would have been part of that early part of your growing up and sporting experience.
Well, I did nothing but kick a footy and play backyard cricket in my free time until I was into my 20s.
Tell us about what happened in your 20s. Did basketball make a reappearance in your calendar?
No. Basketball wasn't even on the radar. Not till I was into my 30s. But I got into squash and I played squash at a reasonable level. And I played for the Diamond Creek Squash Club, and we used to have to travel to places like Point Cook and Bacchus Marsh. We used to play a Ballarat team at Bacchus Marsh, and that was before the ring road, so it took hours to get to those places. And the games would go all night. They often wouldn't finish until 12:30, and I would get home sometimes, at 1:30 or 2 o'clock, and I would turn the TV on and the NBA would be on Channel 2, and all of the games seemed to be like the Bulls, so it was Jordan and Pippen, and that's where I first really got interested in basketball, because I could see what a dynamic sport it is.
So there's a lot of us in Masters basketball that are actually late bloomers, just like you. They discovered basketball in a bigger way after their youth sport experience. At what point in time did this kick in for you? I guess watching NBA and then moving to playing regularly.
Well, the first competitive basketball I played was when I did a Bachelor of Education majoring in PE, which was mixed mode through what is now Edith Cowan University. And basketball was one of the activities. So I was 35, 36 when I was doing that degree. And then after it finished, I looked around for a local club team to play in, and I ended up playing with Kenny Baird in a Dad's Army competition for about 8 or 10 years maybe, and then eventually I discovered that there was a training session down here on Sundays.
Down here, of course, is Veneto Club based in Melbourne. It's been the home court for myths and legends for a very long time, and sometimes we call it the church because it's where we come on Sunday mornings to pray to the gods of basketball and have a training session, and we're also here on Fridays. Rob, what you've just told us is you've been playing basketball for half of your natural life, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Fantastic. In this early part of your late blooming basketball at the age of 36, tell us about some of your early skills. Obviously, you're a bit younger and perhaps even a bit fitter. What was the magic that you were able to bring to a team on court? What do you think you had that others didn't?
Well, my game was 100% run and gun. So I just ran all game. And even in my late 30s, I could still, if the ring was slightly bent, I could just dunk. I dunked in a warm-up once at St. Helena Secondary College in the Elvin competition. That was in the warm-up, and I had an opportunity to dunk in the game, and it's really hard on a fast break to get your timing right, and so I think I might have hit the ring, and that was it.
Okay, so in these formative stages of your late blooming, what was going on with NBA? Did you have an iconic team that you followed, or a player who was really the icon that you aspired to be like?
Yeah, well, it was always the Bulls when Jordan was there. After their great team that Jordan had won 3 or 6 championships in, disbanded, then I stopped following them. But I've always loved Jordan.
Great. And as a point of reference, what was going on in Australia in basketball at that time? Where was it compared to footy and cricket and some of the things that you grew up with?
Yeah, well, look, to be honest, I mean, I went and watched quite a few SEBL games locally, and I watched my kids play basketball for 10 years, but I've never been that interested in the NBL.
Yeah, sure. What followed Dad's army?
Getting to know Kenny Baird, his team went over and played in the World Masters in Portland, and I'm pretty sure that was 1998, and they needed some extra competition, and Kenny Baird knew that I played pickup down at the Eltham Leisure Centre before work, and so he brought his team down for several weeks to play full court against us, and the team included people like Jack Gibson and Frankie Jones, and so it was through them that I heard about the Veneto Club and ended up coming here in 99 or 2000, something like that. And when I first came down here, Kenny Burbridge, who has basically run the training for most of the time since, he must have been on a sabbatical because he wasn't around for the first 6 or 9 months that I started coming. But when he came back to training, he pretty much became my mentor, and so he recruited me to play in a Myths team in the 50s in the 2002 Melbourne World Masters, and it was in the Premier Division. So I found myself going from Dad's army and a bit of other club ball in my very first tournament, playing against ex-NBA players and a lot of great basketballers who I've played with and against ever since, and a couple of them from Melbourne I played with recently, or last year in November at the Gold Coast Masters.
At the Pan Pacific Games for 2022.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Jack Gibson, you also mentioned Frankie Jones, two of our very long-standing members, the elder statesmen of Myths and Legends, who still come down to training themselves every Friday. You also talked a little bit about tournaments, and I guess you spoke about your first World Masters. Perhaps you can tell us a bit more about the Australian Masters Games and the World Masters Games that you've played since you kicked off with your tournaments.
Yeah, look, to be honest, I lose track. I couldn't even tell you how many Australian Masters gold medals I've got, but I've got a few. I've played in, I think, 3 World Masters. I played in Melbourne in 2002, Edmonton in 2005 when I broke my arm on the second day, and then I played in Sydney in 2009. I'm struggling to remember after that, but the other great memory for me was playing in the FIMBA World Masters in Orlando in 2015, and apart from playing with a lot of great local players like Ken Burbridge and Peter Lawler and people of that kind, and playing with and against the Black Americans. One of my big honours is to play with Eddie Palabinskas, and I've played with him 4 times. And to be honest, the first time I played with him, I had no idea who he was. I remember reading, because I always used to read the sports pages, but I can remember reading back in the 70s about an Australian player who was drafted, by the NBA, and he ended up playing ABA, which was later amalgamated with the NBA. But beyond that, I didn't know who he was. The first tournament we played together was at Edmonton. We only spoke once. Well, he spoke to me. He said, "Tough break," after I broke my arm. Second tournament, we had 1 or 2 conversations, and by the time we played together in our 4th tournament at Orlando, we were like BFFs. And Eddie at Orlando, I could run then. Like, I had a pretty serious knee injury in 2013, which has been really frustrating, and it's ongoing. I've had surgery on it twice, but I took had a magic injection before Orlando, which worked beautifully, and all of a sudden I could sprint again. And in the first couple of games, we played the 2 best teams in our draw, and they were the US and Germany, and I believe both of them had ex-NBA players, and they beat us easily, which put us out of the finals. And for the first couple of games, Squizzy Taylor and myself, who we regularly played together, and in the big tournaments, Squizzy would play at 8 and I would play at 9, and we'd both be pulling splinters out of our arse because we got settled in court time. But once we're out of the finals, then I pretty much ran every game. And the last couple of games we played, I think it was like against Paraguay, Venezuela, or teams like that, Palabinskas would just demand the ball in the back court if there's a turnover, and he would just do a big sling throw to me, and I'd be breaking down the court, and like, I don't know what I scored because I never look at the score sheet. But in any case, when I did look at it, it was all just team scores, not individual scores. But I scored a fair bit in those games, and my proudest moment, I had some tough, ugly-looking hombre chasing me down the court. He was about a metre behind me the whole way. Laid the ball in on the left hand, and he slammed into me from behind and just drove me into the ground. I got up, and my policy is always never to show pain. So I got up and didn't react at all. And then I swished my free throw. So, it was a good feeling. That was the best way to pay him back.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Hey, look, you've mentioned a few things there which are noteworthy. I guess there's a number of people in Masters basketball that have been influenced by Eddie Palabinskas, who of course has gone on to do lots of things and be remembered by everybody for being such an influential figure, particularly when it comes to shooting. People have got amazing stories about Eddie Palabinskas walking down the side of the road and hitchhiking to a tournament. You also mentioned Squizzy Taylor. We've just come out of the Squizzy Classic, which is of course the tournament that we hold down in Korumburra to commemorate the life and contribution of Michael Squizzy Taylor. And so it's great that tournament's growing. Finally, Robbo, you mentioned in that last little sequence a couple of your injuries, your arm and your knee. But in fact, you've had a litany of injuries over your basketball experience. Maybe you can give us a bit of a feel for that.
Well, I've lost count of the number of fractures I've had. By the way, these are all basketball injuries. I never had a soft tissue injury in my life until I was in my mid-40s, but they're all basketball injuries. So, I'm pretty famous for my mangled fingers. I tore two of my adductor muscles right off my pelvis, which made things awkward for a couple of years. I had an imploded eye socket, like James Hurt did. That healed itself. Yeah, I've had a whole series of grade 3 tears, so biceps on one arm, triceps on the other, the medial head of my gastrocnemius on one of my legs, which should have slowed me down because, the gastrocnemius is a high twitch muscle, but, and it's all just joined together with scar tissue because it was a complete separation. But the soleus underneath it, which is an endurance muscle, somehow compensated, so I felt like it didn't really slow me down much after all. Yeah, but I've had loads of injuries.
And you're fighting back from Pan Pacific Games where your knee was inflamed. I remember seeing you halfway through the tournament and you were in excruciating pain, and I think one of our members, Oscar Carlson, helped you to get back out on the court again. So tell us about how you're feeling at the moment. I noticed you've been at training a little bit more often, a bit more agile. How are you going?
Well, I went back to another surgeon recently and they got me to do an x-ray before they saw me. This was just last week actually, and my knee's just totally bone on bone. Whatever meniscus I had is either been cut away or worn away. So the only surgical intervention really is a complete knee replacement, and they won't do it because the surgeon said to me, "Can you walk a kilometre?" And I said, "Yes." "Does the pain wake you up at night?" I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you're not a candidate for a knee replacement." So it's just a condition that I have to, put up with and bitch about, to anyone who's stupid enough to be around me, when I've got the opportunity.
Robbo, I have the pleasure of training with you regularly. You're here most Friday mornings, you're here on Sundays as well, and you have a certain intensity under the basket. You're very difficult to defend. You've got an amazing little fall away putback shot. Otherwise, you've just got great hustle under the rim and make it very difficult for people to defend you and stop the ball from going into the net. So how would you reflect on your Masters game here at the age of 72, your skill sets compared to where you started off?
Well, I guess my desire's always been the same. In the last couple of years, others probably wouldn't agree, but I feel like I finally developed a jump shot. Like at the age of 70. I wish I had been coached when I was young, because the jump shot's probably the most important weapon in basketball. But it works sometimes. It feels, the shot feels really good off the hand sometimes, and I just try and keep replicating that. But yeah, I watch other people. I learn a lot of other people. If I see them, do something flashy, then I'll practice, and every now and then I'll use it. A couple of times in a game when I've been driving and laying in on my left hand, I've taken the ball behind my back and laid in, and I often practice that in practice, but I've only ever used it a couple of times in anger. Another thing I practice a fair bit, and Ken Cole kicked my ass for this in Orlando, but doing those Larry Bird shots behind the backboard. And I remember one time Greg Pearson was hotly defending me, and I was going to lay in again on my left hand, and he was defending me too tight for me to make a standard left-hand lay-in. This is just a practice. And I went past the backboard and I laid the ball in up over the backboard and it went in. Like it's a one shot in a million, you know, and I could never do it again. But I did it once and I enjoyed doing that sort of stuff.
I'd be telling that story if I was you as well. Greg's a little bit like yourself. He's got incredible basketball intelligence on the court and just a great defender. When you look back over the arc of your basketball journey, what is it that you think makes a great team?
Well, I actually studied this. I did 5 years of applied science in human movement, and one of the subjects I did was sports psychology, so I've probably got an unfair advantage there. Interestingly, there's been research on team dynamics, you know, like how everyone gets on with each other, and the research, at least based on the research going back to when I was, you know, doing applied science or human movement, so there's no connection between, you know, really good team dynamics and the success of the basketball team. You know, I mean, for example, there might not have been all that much love between different members of the Bulls. You know, like we all know Jordan gave Luke Longley a hard time and that sort of thing. And Luke Longley obviously, you know, wasn't comfortable with that for decades later, you know, but they were still an incredibly successful team. So it's really hard to put your finger on one thing. There are a lot of things, but you need to have the right balance of players. You need to have everyone working in unison. I'll tell you the best team basketball I've ever played in. Before we went to Edmonton, the Melbourne-based players in that team, so there's Ken Burbridge, Ian Farr, Peter Lawler, Squizzy and myself, we played the Westies over in Altona. We went down there, we might have gone there a couple of times, but I remember we went there one time and they had we were 55s by this time, I think, in Edmonton. I forget, 50s, 55s, doesn't matter, but we played their 50 plus team and we played their 45 plus team. They had good players, really good players, but we played a quarter at a time. We played a quarter against the older guys, a quarter against the younger guys, then against the older guys. So we played 4 quarters. They all just played 2 quarters, so they were fresher. And we just played run and gun. And this was Burbs orchestrating it. And, you know, he'd usually get the ball in the back court and he would just give it off and everyone would run. We would all run. And it was such an offensive weapon, and it just felt like we were playing, you know, as the one body, the one unit, and it was an incredible feeling. And when you get that kind of understanding on the court and that kind of, you know, synchronism, you know, you're going to get the results, or you're going to be far more likely to get the results, and you're going to get a lot of personal reward out of it, you know. So that was great. And then when we went to Edmonton, you know, we ended up, I feel very sorry for Jack Gibson because he was our official coach, but we had Ken Cole on the court, we had Palabinskas, we had Bird. So if we had a timeout, it'd be Ken Cole would be telling us one thing, Palabinskas would be telling us something else, and Burbs would say his piece, and then Jack had just about to say something, and the, you know, refs would call time. But we never played run and gun basketball. We just played, you know, more of a so-called scientific game. So all of that great training, in a sense, went to waste.
Right. Myths and Legends has been part of this 36-year journey. You've been coming here 23 years and training and participating in tournaments. Tell us about myths and legends in your own words.
Well, look, the nearest comparison I can think of is, for me, and I know, like women are a big part of the club, and we often don't only see that at tournaments, but, like I'm incredibly respectful and admiring of the women who I've connected with in the club, and all the unsung heroes, like Grace, who just does so much work. But from my personal point of view, the myths is like a men's shed. I don't mean it's not exclusive, it's inclusive. We get great women who have come down over the years, and some of them are very good. And one time, Graham LaFontaine brought one of his American players, a black American woman who was about 5'11" or something like that, and she broke both my ankles. I was trying to guard her for 15 minutes. But in terms of what the club means to me, it's like my men's shed. I get all of the emotional well-being, and actually playing on the court. I love the guys I play with. You couldn't get a nicer group of guys. Like the older guys get grumpy, and I saw that up at the Gold Coast. But all the younger guys just have such a good attitude. They don't have an attitude, which is important, and they solve problems. If there are ever any problems, they solve those problems easily and quickly, and with a good sense of humour. So it's fantastic. Yeah.
Well, when you talk about young guys, you're usually talking about over 50s and over 55s. But if we change the definition of young to our youth, we've now got basketball as the #1 sport in Victoria, trending towards #2 nationally. What would be your advice to young Aussie kids, male and female, who are getting into basketball? They look at players like yourself who are still going at the age of 72. What words of encouragement would you give young basketballers?
Well, firstly, just on the question of the definition of youth, when I joined this club, when I was around the age of 50 or about to turn 50, I was a part of the youth development squad, and as far as I'm concerned, I still am. But I'll tell you the advice that I gave my grandson, who's only just taken up the game, and he drove down from Noosa, it's like a 3-hour drive or something, to the Gold Coast to watch me play in the final in the Pan Pacs. And he'd only a week or two ago, only ever shot his first goal in basketball, so he's just starting his career. But he's got good genes, like he'll probably be about 6'8" when he grows up and stuff like that. But I said to him, look, if you get into basketball and you love it, then you'll probably still be playing at my age, and you'll still be getting a lot of pleasure from it. So that's what you've got to remember, and like my son, I know I'm biased, but my son's close to the best basketball I've ever seen. He never went on with basketball. He retired at the age of 26. I suppose he had to overcome a lot of problems to get where he was, but he is just an amazing basketballer. And he used to come down to after work practices on Friday at Diamond Valley College, and the guy who ran those practices for 20 years said Jess was the best player who ever went down there. And there are, NBA players who went down there, but like he had so many difficulties and so many hardships, and when he first started playing championship over here in Victoria. There was a grading game where the team he was in, which was Eltham 3, which was never going to play, like M1. The coach thought, well, if we win this grading game, we'll get into M1. And anyway, so the team they played dead because they didn't want to play M1. And Jess got 0 court time. And then, but he was a kid who persevered and he kept going. And by the end of the season, when the proper season started, he was in the starting 5 because he never let it bother him. He just kept going. He never let anything bother him. His mind was in the game, and that's all. None of the other bullshit.
I guess it's really important for people to understand that there's this psychological benefit to playing as well as the physical benefit, and I think you've summed it up beautifully with that response. Hey Robbo, thanks so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We appreciate you taking us through the arc of your, basketball experience. You're an absolute legend. Continue to play hard. I look forward to training with you and playing with you. And again, thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, well, I feel, in all fairness, my career hasn't peaked yet.
So we've got lots to look forward to.
They tell me, when you get to the age of 75, then, all of a sudden, everything falls apart. And so I'm going to see if I can disprove that theory.
Well done again. Thanks so much.
No worries.
Cheers.
Okay, good on you.